Ah, come on, Lego, you gotta let it go. Why are you still talking about this, man? It's already done. You already made like 3 videos about this, and yeah, I know we did. I know we've already beaten this horse down. It is already dead and gone. Its soul is sent up to wherever souls go when they pass away, and you're a horse. But when it comes to the Montreal Canadiens 5th overall pick, David Reinbacher, there still are a lot of Habs fans that I'm seeing on my timeline every day that are ticked off that they didn't take Michkov. It happens, right? And we already talked about the reasons why the scouts went out there and said they took Reinbacher, why they prioritized the defenseman over the top Russian goal-scoring prospect, and I feel like we did a pretty good job in going over all those things. I feel like just talking about it and explaining the different scouts and their reasons, it's been pretty thorough in the way we've done that, especially with all the articles that have come out ever since the draft came and went. But today I wanted to focus on a perspective from a Montreal scout who's not been really considered in this conversation just yet. Until now. This comes to us from the form of George Laraque, who had himself an appearance on the Sick podcast with Tony Marinaro. The link to the audio is going to be in the description if you want to go ahead and listen to this clip. And another link is going to be down there as well to this article on TVA Sports published on July 7th. It goes over the comments that Laraque made on the Sick podcast, and it talks about Michkov. A Canadian scout explained the real reasons the Habs didn't draft him. This article is published from French into English, which doesn't really make too much sense from the perspective of me making a video about it because the video audio of Laraque talking is actually in English. But either way, the article where we can screenshot and put it up on the screen is French to English, so I had to translate that here. During a candid chat at the airport with George Laraque, a Montreal Canadiens scout revealed why the Habs really turned their nose up at Matvei Michkov at the 5th spot in the draft. The former strongman returned to this meeting in the podcast, The Sick Podcast with Tony Marinaro. In the clip, which is also in this article, Laraque goes out there and talks about how he ran into a Montreal scout whose name he's not going to reveal at the airport. I went to see him and to ask him, what did you do? Why didn't you draft Michkov? Now, summary, before we get into that, we had talked about in the previous few videos that the Montreal Canadiens, they liked defense, they thought that Reinbacher was a really strong player, that all of their scouts unanimously agreed that they wanted Reinbacher over Michkov at 5th overall. There also was a conversation in the previous few videos about culture, how this guy cultivates that. And so, from what we gathered, essentially, the Montreal Canadiens just really liked David Reinbacher, and they felt that he fit with their identity of what they wanted to build. Sure, there were other comments saying, oh, if Reinbacher was left-handed, we might not have liked him as much, which makes it seem like they're drafting for need, but at the same time, what was said, and we already made our videos about that. This is where we get ourselves a differing perspective. Maybe one that's not entirely different, but it's like a cousin perspective of the other one that we had just talked about. The Montreal Canadiens scout that was talking to George Laraque started talking about defense and how defense wins championships. Then, continued Laraque, he spoke to me about culture, which is important among the Montreal Canadiens. This scout told me that in Montreal, with the culture the organization is trying to build, if there's a bad apple in the locker room, it won't work. The Montreal Canadiens had doubts about Michkov's attitude. Laraque explains this. The Montreal Canadiens relied on echoes coming from Russia. There are negative stories circulating about Michkov and that he causes problems and he's not a team player. This article on TVA then revisits the same comments we had talked about from Martin Lapointe last time, how the Canadiens did not disdain Michkov's talent, he is very talented, competitive, and he works well at the bottom of the ice. But on the other side, it's a little bit worse. But you live with his mistakes. There were so many unknowns, 3 years of waiting, so we leaned towards Reinbacher. And of course, this is a little bit more vague. It praises Michkov a bit more than the way the Montreal scout was apparently talking to Laraque at the airport, only for him to share that story on the Sick podcast with Tony Marinaro. But it really kind of paints a bigger picture as to why this might have been the perspective the Canadiens had. That they really focused a lot more so on that culture than we were led to believe at the beginning. When they talked about Reinbacher, they said, yeah, this guy embodies the culture we want to build. He's got this personality that we like, and he's a leader, this and that. And to hear Laraque ask a Canadian scout, hey, why didn't you draft Michkov? Only for that scout to rebuttal and say, hey, if you have a bad apple, you can't win. It's really telling as to what the Canadians were feeling towards Michkov this entire time. Now, reports came out of Russia talking about all these personality things and attitude problems. We made a video about that a few months ago, just talking about what the perspectives are floating around there, that Michkov may be some sort of a prima donna, but like, I don't know, a part of me doesn't even really want to consider it because he's a Russian player, and Russian players always get this sort of reputation thrown upon them all the time. Like, it's very odd how a lot of these guys are seen as problematic personalities in the locker room right away. Laroque goes out there on this sick podcast clip and asks Tony Marinaro, hey, how many young Russian players that are like under the age of 20 or first year NHL, how many of these guys are actually problematic personalities? None of them are. Maybe they become that later down the line, 7-10 years down the line, but never when they're this young. And so to deny Matvei Michkov a draft spot because you just don't like a lot of what you're hearing based off of him, it doesn't really feel all too fair, in my opinion. Especially when you consider the response from the fans saying, hey, like, why didn't you take this guy? Like, if you have people at the airport coming up to you if you're a Canadian scout asking you, hey, why didn't you draft that guy? And you have to have this answer prepared in your head, like, it's tough, isn't it? And that, again, is not to discredit David Reinbacher. I do think he can become a great player. I've said this the entire time I was okay with the pick. It's just, now hearing the reasons why. They didn't like Matvei Michkov because of the uncertainty of having all this time in Russia. Okay, well, some of the other guys taken in the NCAA, maybe some other players in Europe might not come over right away either, so I personally don't agree with the concern. And hearing all these rumors out of Russia that he's this and he's that, and using that as your Bible as to dictate your decision on this, I feel like that's a little bit sus too. I mean, the way it's phrased here from Laroque, there are negative stories circulating about him that he causes problems and he is not a team player. And these echoes were coming from Russia. Like, does it not seem suspicious to you? Part of me thinks, like, if I had to try to put my tinfoil hat on right now, and this is not me saying anything that's true, I'm just trying to throw out some ideas out there, would it not be in Russia's best interest to keep Matvei Michkov in their league? Would it not be more appropriate for them to have this guy than not have this guy? Would there not be some sort of a motivation to say, all right, well, hypothetically speaking, this is theoretical, this is not true, this is just me spitting off the top of my head. Maybe we could start some rumors about this guy, that he is not coachable, that he's a bad personality, he's a bad teammate, he's this, he's that, and maybe NHL teams will pass on him as a result. Maybe it'll allow us to keep him for longer. Does that not sound like a plausible conclusion? Like, of course, I'm not saying this is happening, but I don't know, it feels so weird to hear that this guy has a bad personality off of echoes from Russia, only for the Philadelphia Flyers to do their research, draft this guy at 7th overall, and say all the good things they've been saying about him too. They've been really praising this guy. And I get it, it's because, alright, yeah, he's their guy, they're gonna praise the guy, but for Canadian scouts even behind closed doors at the airport to go out there and tell people, yeah, if you got one bad apple, it ruins your entire locker room dynamic, implying that Michkov is a bad apple type of personality. Like, I don't know, that's a pretty harsh accusation to throw towards an 18-year-old, but again, we've said all of the stuff about Reinbacher as well. If it's true that they do feel that way about Michkov, it's understandable as to why they passed on him, and with all the extra information that they really did just like Reinbacher that much, I could understand why they did it. Of course, I said this before, it's not the pick I would have made. I would have taken Michkov at 2, to be honest. I really do think that he's going to be that good. But at the end of the day, the draft is the draft. It's come and gone, and we have ourselves even more ideas as to why things went the way that they did. So if you're a Canadiens fan, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about this explanation? It's a little bit more in-depth than all the Reinbacher stuff we had talked about last time when it came to why the Canadiens did not draft Michkov, but hearing now that they just didn't like his personality, they think he's a bad apple, they're hearing these echoes from Russia that he's a bad teammate, how does that make you feel? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Trolls 99, and bye.